Shavua Tov, everybody. Philip has agreed to read for us the final extract from his book, which has now been renamed as My Path, or as he would say, My Path. After this, if you want to read any more, if you want to hear any more, you're going to have to fork out for it because the book is going to be for sale. So I'm going to hand you over to Philip, and he's going to read the last extract of his book. Philip, all yours.
Have you pressed on record?
Yes.
Good. Okay, ladies and gentlemen, this is what I will be reading from today. It's the pilot of the first few hundred copies of the book. There still are corrections. That's why the book will only be ready in a month or two's time. But I'm reading from this. Dennis, as in Thatcher. As for Gilla, she was about to take a big step upwards. First, but only for a couple of years, she had taught and proved herself to be a fantastic teacher and educator. Then she had become the pedagogical coordinator, compiling with the Melton Center and in partnership with many other Hebrew Jewish schools worldwide, learning materials for all levels. Now a surprise was going to happen. Both Hebrew school heads before her, emissaries from the Jewish agency, had proved to be highly unsatisfactory. I'm not going into their activities. That would be material for another book. One day, as I walked into the Diamond Bourse buying hall, a 2,500 square foot area where foreign buyers sat at long tables and completed their purchasing for my morning coffee, one of the school committee members and a friend walked over with a big grin on his face and said to me in English, "Better put your hands behind your back and learn to walk behind your wife, Dennis." I looked at him with a surprised look on my face. "What are you talking about?" He laughed and said, "You're the husband of the new head of the Hebrew section of the school." My jaw dropped and I stammered back, "You're kidding me. She never told me about it." His reply was, "She didn't know till last night. This was a sudden decision by the committee." "And she accepted?" I asked. "She had to. No one else is as qualified as she is. She's actually been doing the job a long time. Now we're making it official." And so I acquired the title of Dennis, a title that I held for the next 16 years till we retired. Tomasz. In recent research about feline behavioral activity, it has been discovered that unlike what was previously thought, cats are attached to their humans as much as dogs are and suffer from separation anxiety as much as their canine counterparts, which can make them difficult to read and therefore very dangerous. Shiva was very lonely and therefore became unpredictable, as Noah was away a lot from early mornings till late at night. She could turn on Noah anytime. So it was decided to have her move to a kind of cat commune, taken care of by a lady who lived some distance away. I used to visit Shiva about once a month after we moved here to pay the lady for her food and lodgings. To begin with, Shiva lived under a bed in the lady's house. Later, when she got used to her surroundings, the climate, even in winter being very mild, she would interact with the other 20 or so cats living with the lady, eventually becoming happier. It is to be hoped. Once, just after we had moved here, the girls were having a girly chat in Noah's place. I was getting a little bored with this, so I announced I was going down to a rather trendy cafe a couple of minutes walk away to go on working on a comedy routine I had started at home that very morning. When I walked into the place, there were only a few people. One standout sitting at the bar and sporting a long ponytail with his back to me seemed like a likely candidate to interact and start a conversation with, one of my favorite pastimes. I find that in 99% of cases, when you open a conversation with a wide smile, you won't get a brush off, either from women or men. So I sat down in the empty seat next to him and addressed him in English with a big smile. Are you a martial artist? No, I'm an actor. So why are you sporting a ponytail, if I might be so bold as to ask? By the way, I need to ask you a small favor. What are you drinking? Quite a strange way to start a conversation, don't you think? But my new friend was unfazed. He spoke excellent English with a slight American inflection. I'll have another red wine if you don't mind. No problem, I'll join you. We proceeded to imbibe the good house wine and we introduced ourselves. My name's Charles. I've just made Aliyah from Belgium, but I was born in England. This seemed to satisfy him. I'm Tomer Sharon, also known as Tomash, and I work in Habima. This theatre is the biggest one in Israel, which meant that my new friend was a star in his own right. It turned out that his favorite co-thespian is Leah Koenig. She's a very famous actress, now in her late 80s, who still acts and is a national icon. I then said, I'm a karateka, and I've just written a comedy routine about karate. I'd really be honored if you had a look at it, even though you're not in the field, the karate field, that is. He was surprised at this, thinking I'd wanted an autograph or some such souvenir of our meeting, but assented readily, especially when I told him that the text wasn't long. Anyway, at the end, and after I'd seen him literally shake with laughter, especially with the gonads in the air bit, he said, You've got to perform it. It's brilliant. Needless to say, I haven't until now. I did propose to him a comedy routine, though. The premise was that he, being very left-wing, which he doesn't deny, and I, being quite to the right of the political spectrum, I would act as a new Ole from Germany, speaking Hebrew with a very strong German accent and with extreme right-wing leanings, to his proverbial left-wing Tel Aviv resident, each with his own extreme political opinions. He thought the idea was funny, but unfortunately didn't go into it with me, being just too busy. Apart from him being an actor, he's also a singer with his own band and popular with that too. We rarely see each other, but whenever we do, like the last time I saw the band performing at an outside venue in Tel Aviv, with tables surrounded by a good crowd, I, sitting right at the front at one, all on my own, he acknowledged my presence with the following. And here's little Charlie, all on his own, and right up at the front. Say hello to him, folks. He's the funniest fascist you'll ever meet. The weakest link. A couple of years before I retired, I had the luck to become a candidate to appear in the famous British game show, The Weakest Link, compared by the inimitable Anne Robinson. I stayed with Leon and the family when I was in London. I went over to BBC Slough for an audition, which I passed with flying colours. When I was asked if I could take stick, a very important ingredient in the programme, I answered with a laugh. Of course I can take stick. I've been taking it all my life. There was one drawback, though. To participate in the show, one had to be a UK resident, which I wasn't. I got Leon's permission to give his address as mine when I was in London. The cover story being that I was traveling all the time, buying and selling big diamonds all over the world. I had a Belgian cell phone, though, which could create problems, as in the year after the audition, before the episode I was in was actually filmed, the BBC phoned me every week to ask me all kinds of questions. I told them a little about what I was still supposedly doing, although I was almost finished now, winding my professional life down, and also let them know that I was a good singer too. Every time the girl from Auntie Beeb called, though, she would say, "That's a funny number you have." And I would answer, "I work in Antwerp most of the time, buying goods for my customers. I'm off to Hong Kong when I'm finished here, but you can use the same number if you really need me. I'll be there for 2 weeks. This is a bit of a whopper, but all in a good cause. After I left Hong Kong in 1973, I never went back. Promptly 2 weeks and a day later, the cell phone would ring for another round of questions. The program seems to be full of off the cuff. To be off the cuff, but it isn't. There is a script which is prepared by the writers and Anne herself, so that her questions to the panel are prepared with a lot of detail. I flew to London a couple of days before the filming so that I would be relaxed enough for the ordeal to follow. When I got to the film studio, I met the rest of the panel. We had to wait about 90 minutes as another episode was being filmed ahead of us and another would be afterwards. They filmed, I believe, 6 episodes a week over a 2-day period. It doesn't sound much, but it was a lot of work, both for the film and production crew as well as for Anne Robinson herself. Why had I wanted to be on The Weakest Link? I was still a frustrated actor and thought that given a little leeway, I could still manifest myself as a hidden talent. I was right. After the first round, when we voted Nick, the lock keeper, off for not remembering what the word hanky was an abbreviation of, Anne turned to me and started asking me questions. What do you do? I sell diamonds, Anne. I travel all over the world selling big stones. Do you sell big stones to famous people then? She asked. Sometimes, was my retort. And do you tell whom you sold to when you sell to famous people then? No, I don't reveal whom I sell big diamonds to. Her reply was then, if you sold me a big stone, wouldn't you tell, even if I wanted the people to know I'd bought a big stone from you? I didn't reply before she then asked, and do you carry a big gun with you when you go to sell big diamonds? To which my reply with a slight smirk was, no, I don't have to. I'm a third-degree black belt in karate. This is what she'd been waiting for, of course. Show us some karate then. To this I replied, as I was very limited in my movements, can I get off this stool I'm standing on? She assented, but then very typically said when she looked at me, there's not much of you, is there? I laughingly agreed with her and then performed 4 moves on both right and left sides quite fast, and I think in an absolutely spectacular, remember yet again my inspiration, Seinfeld manner. She looked a little doubtful and then said, now, can you show us something sexy? To this, I responded with a mawashi uke or double roundhouse palm strike, which is executed with a pronounced pelvic thrust. She then gave a very slight smile and told me to get back up on my stool, followed by asking me the reason I had voted Nick, the lockkeeper, off. In the second round, she again took the mickey out of me. She asked Susie, the young college student standing on my right, to promote me, the man with more than one chin. Susie did. She was only 21 then, but called me hot, and maybe a little too hot for me, my being almost 3 times older than me. I was voted off in the third round. It was a tactical vote because in all 3 rounds I appeared in, I wasn't the weakest link. The problem was young James, a very left-leaning political student who didn't take to, yet again, a 3 times older than him, capitalistic diamond dealer. Susie also voted against me. In that round, she was actually the worst player. Votes, however, are votes, and I had to go. In my final word to the camera, I voiced my astonishment at Susie voting against me after having pronounced me sexy. In the second round, asking, so why did she vote me off in the third round? It was a very funny round because Anne asked Sue, who was rather well endowed, if her breasts were real, urged her to stand in profile, and finally got out of her that she was very proud of them. This was the second lowest pot ever won on the program, only £880, and it was won, you've guessed it, by the weakest link, young Susie, to whom I don't begrudge her victory at all. I don't know what became of young James, but hope that he didn't become an influential politician, as I'm sure that due to his left-leaning inclinations, he would today be a supporter of BDS, another ignoramus, backing a cause of terror against the country I have been living in for the past 10 years. As to Anne, only the winner, Susie, and the runner-up, the well-endowed Sue, got to meet her fleetingly for a curt congratulations. Between rounds, she had gone off to her dressing room, maybe for a little fortifier to keep her on an even keel during the rest of the proceedings. I had a great time on the show and think that Anne is a brilliant comedienne, not giving an inch away from the sarcastic, very slim battle axe she was meant to portray. I have a DVD of the whole show that I still watch, as at this very moment, from time to time, and it still gets a belly laugh out of me, especially at little Susie's promotion of me. The rest of my life in Belgium, which lasted, that's it. Sorry. The Mavi Marmara. I went on doing karate at more frequent intervals now, often going to Hasselt by train and staying overnight, so I could get a morning and evening training in, which meant that at the tender age of 63, I was now often training 5 times a week. One morning, returning to Antwerp from there, I walked into the generally, at that post-rush hour, almost empty carriage. Dirk, Martina, and I would have a leisurely breakfast, as they were also in pre-retirement mode. Dirk having been a head teacher, and Martina also having been in education. He would then drive me to the station for the more or less hour-long ride back to Antwerp, where before boarding, we would have another coffee together. In the carriage, there were only 2 other passengers. It was in June, only 6 months before I was due to leave for Israel, and only a month after the Mavi Marmara incident, where 9 Turkish members of the flotilla that this boat belonged to, trying to break the Israeli blockade on Gaza, where the Sunni Hamas organization was imposing its will on the populace and daily declaring its intention to obliterate the Jewish state of Israel, were killed by Israeli commandos when they resisted their boarding the boat. Blockade is actually a big word, as food, medicines, and other staples of civilian society are let in, both by land and by sea, to the enclave. But weapons and the means of manufacturing them are definitely not. Both passengers were tall. To me, anyone over 5'7" is very tall. One was blonde and blue-eyed, and the other very tanned with curly black hair and deep brown eyes. They both spoke the local Limburg dialect to each other and looked to be in their 20s. We started talking to each other. I explained to them that I was on my way back home after having spent the night in the Homburg dojo in Hasselt, where I had trained under the guidance of Dirk Heine sensei. I told them that I was a third Dan, and Dirk's reputation being what it is, they were duly impressed, knowing who the man is. They told me they were postgraduate students in the VUB, the Free Brussels University, a very good one academically, but also known for its left-wing, anti-Israeli politics. Although, of course, it works with Israeli universities, their standards being of world renown. Then I did something stupid. I turned to the darkish guy and said, being in an angry mood, just having seen an anti-Israel article in one of the Flemish broadsheets, "You don't look Belgian. Where are you from?" The young man frowned and answered, "I am, you know. My parents were born in Turkey." In Belgium, as in most of Europe, there is a large Turkish and Moroccan population, as well as quite a lot of Spaniards and Italians. They were brought to Belgium in the 20th century to work in the coal mines and other places where cheap labor was needed. The Christian Spaniards and Italians only had to adapt to the colder northern climate, and they did, generally succeeding well, as their culture was in fact the same as the culture of their hosts. Some of the Muslim immigrants succeeded too, but not very many. 3 generations after arriving, the Muslims still identify themselves as deeply religious, which in itself would be all right if they didn't want to impose their belief on the whole of Europe, as well as Quranic law, the Sharia, a deeply misogynistic and anti-almost everything appreciated by the Western cultural system. They are very militant, as encouraged from abroad and on frequent visits to Brussels by such people as Tayyip Recep Erdogan, the Turkish president, and a militant Sunni who also has issues with the Shia branch of that religion, having troops on the ground in Syria, Iraq, Yemen, and Libya, whereas a NATO member he really shouldn't be. On the other hand, the new Belgians of North African origin are also violently pro-anything that smacks of being anti-Israel and pro-Sharia. In other parts of Europe, Pakistani, Afghani, and other ethnic groups, all fiercely anti-Western and militantly Islamic in character, are being given more and more leeway in invading Europe. For those, now more than 10% of the European population are definitely a radical fifth column, most of them ghettoized by choice in no-go areas where Christian and Jew fear to tread. Their Arab brethren know what a threat they can be and foist them off on the West, just so as not to have to give them safe harbor to this, their own kith and kin, existential threat. I was in a dangerous mood, so said to my new friend of Turkish origin, "That's interesting. As a matter of fact, I've been offered a new job and shall shortly be moving to the Middle East." Not, of course, stipulating to where. He, thinking of Kuwait, Qatar, or the UAE, as those are the usual destinations for Europeans moving to the Middle East, for professional reasons, of course, asked, "Where to?" To which I answered with a beatific smile, "To Israel. I've been offered the job to head a flotilla to Istanbul to help evacuate Armenians and Kurds from Turkey. By the way, are there any Armenians left in Turkey?" He went a deep puce color and spat out, "Those murdering bastards, they should all be wiped out." His blonde, blue-eyed friend was having a good laugh as I responded, "Well, I'm here. I think it was those fucking murdering bastards on the Mavi Marmara who got what they deserved. By the way, You haven't answered my question. Care to make an issue of it? Of course he didn't. I had introduced myself well. Sometimes I remind myself of Mighty Mouse. I can be very threatening. He picked up his rucksack and left the carriage with his friend. I was alone, fell asleep and had to be woken up by the train guard upon arrival in Antwerp. I went home, changed and went to the bus, which I could now enter again to see some friends and have a chat. Those trips to Hustle could sometimes be dangerous, as I have recounted earlier. In 2 successive years, 2009 and 2010, I broke my right hand and my left arm, even having to put off my aliyah from December 2010 to February 2011 because of the second mishap. I was not suffering from osteoporosis or some other brittle bone syndrome. It was just that the sessions were hard, both mentally and physically. I learned so much, though, in that period, just after I retired and was waiting to leave. I believe that that was the time that the finalization of my karate formation happened. The speed, power, and especially the automatization of the techniques into my brain that would stand me in good stead when I taught anti-knife defenses later in Israel were perfected then. That's when I learned to use them. I learned to use them in realistic situations. My last curtain call. I became an Israeli citizen. Gila arrived in July, and then something very important for me happened. I got my last go in the spotlights. One morning, browsing on the internet, I saw an advertisement for new English-speaking talent to take part in a musical which would take place in Tel Aviv. I told Gila, who said, "We're all settled in now, you're not very busy. Why don't you try for it?" So I made an appointment to take an audition, and a couple of days later popped off to Tel Aviv. I didn't audition in the theatre where the show was to take place, but in the director's apartment. Her name was Helen Kay, and she was well known in both Hebrew and English-speaking audiences in Israel, as well as having been a theatre critic for the Jerusalem Post. She has just died at the age of 86, but was very sprightly when I met and worked with her almost 10 years ago. She asked me to sing something for her, which I did. She said, "That's all right, but can you sing a little bit more convincingly?" I had sung a Beatles number and thought it was very good, but never having been a professional, it might have lacked the vocal intensity of someone like Paul McCartney. So I tried the first stanza of Piano Man by Billy Joel, again getting it from her. "Can't you put more feeling into it? Your pitch is good and you sing in tune, but there's no feeling there." Now desperate and still not understanding what she wanted, as I felt that I had put a lot of feeling into it, I dropped to my knees in front of the couch she was perched on and gave her a soulful rendering of yet again a Billy Joel number, "Just the Way You Are." This one hit the spot as she simpered and said, "I knew you could do it. That's singing. You're hired." Actually, I wasn't, because this was amateur theatre. I wasn't going to get a dime. I didn't care, though. I was going back in front of an audience, somewhere I loved to be. TACT was the name of the group, standing for Tel Aviv Community Theatre. Anglos love theatre, and a few hundreds of thousands of Olim from English-speaking countries have set up quite a few amateur and semi-professional theatre groups in Israel, which cater to a wide public, including native Hebrew speakers who love English and American plays. Rehearsals were to take place twice a week in Tel Aviv for 3 months, and then the last month there would be thrice weekly stage rehearsals. The show was called Happy Hour in Israel. It was written by Daniel Schwartzman, now a good friend, who would drum out a new production about once every 18 months to general acclaim in the country. His daytime job is musical director in the Bet Tzvi Theatre School, where we once had the privilege of being invited to watch a performance of Les Miserables in Hebrew by the students, which was a top-level performance. Happy Hour was very good too, understandably so. Some of the cast, like the Howdens, Rose and Steve, the well-known folk singer Sandy Cash, and Dvorah Barnholtz, teaching in Thelma Yellin, another well-known theatre school, were in the business, as well as Yisrael Levitt, actually a daytime doctor, but a regular on Israeli amateur productions. The only real amateurs were Ronnie Kives, who was drafted into the production at a very late stage, replacing a character who had fallen ill, Melis Boscovich of blessed memory, Charlotte Salomon, now a budding politician back in the UK, and me. The synopsis of the play was quite simple. It was about a class reunion 30 years on. There were some romantic intrigues as well as some psychological ones. My role, named Vincent Perrone, having a flawed past. I had been a virtuoso trumpet player in my youth, but had flunked my first serious test, a solo part at a concert at Carnegie Hall, when because of strange stage fright, I had fled the stage before playing my first note, never again to touch a trumpet. The only thing in real life I had ever played, even remotely resembling a trumpet, had been a shofar or ram's horn. The sound which I emitted from that instrument sounded very much like a loud ram's fart. Luckily, in the play, I didn't have to show off my trumpeting talents real time. One of the cast, I won't say who, liked farting as a hobby, as they put it. The farts were totally odorless, which testified to a healthy diet, but could hit really high decibel levels. Somehow, with my ram's horn experience, we got on very well together. The music was very much influenced by Stephen Sondheim and Leonard Bernstein, two of Daniel's favorite composers. There were some amazing numbers, one of which, I Don't Want to Be 50, I still sometimes render at 50-year birthday parties. I had a very long solo, almost 4 minutes long, called But Oh How That Young Man Could Play. There were a lot of high notes in it, at which I excelled. There were also a couple of dance numbers, which Rose, a choreographer in real life, put together. I and a few others on stage weren't very good dancers, so instead of what should have been a chorus line lookalike, sometimes looked like Dumbo and Friends. The 4-month rehearsal period had its ups and downs. The director and the composer come playwright, come accompanist, for at the piano at the back of the stage sat Daniel in all his glory, caressing the ivories at any suspicion of a voice raised in song as his score demanded. Helen, not having directed any musicals of any import in her distinguished directorial path, and Daniel sometimes had acerbic discussions as to what path to follow. Maybe Daniel should have directed the whole show himself. When a couple of years later the show was staged off Broadway with a professional crew and cast, Daniel had the last word in the creative process. It was called A Casual Gathering and was very successful over there. Here it was successful too. It had a short run, only 5 performances. The nightly crowds were mainly family and friends of the actors, Helen and Daniel. The theatre, a small one in North Tel Aviv, Bet Yad Labanim, the home of the outstretched hand to our boys, basically a symbol of support to the brave boys in the army, with about 150 seats, really rocked when the hour and a bit long show was on. I didn't ever see soldiers in the audience, but I suppose that's because nowadays they probably never heard of Bernstein or Sondheim. We got a lot of applause. Now, just shy of a year in Israel, a surprising amount of my friends and acquaintances, even down to my cousin Abe, now residing in the holy city of Jerusalem, and his lovely wife Angela, came to see me in action. Abe said that I lost a few friends by having them come to see you, which I never believed, as I heard no booing, but only applause during the whole show. Daniel and I stayed in contact. I went to his yearly workshops in the very same theatre, where a group of up to 15 participants would sing under his piano guidance. There are a few YouTube clips with one particular rendering of my sidling up to a statuesque blonde, a head taller than me, and at the most a third of my age, and asking her, "Do you love me?" from Fiddler on the Roof, which gets a lot of laughs as being a very personal rendering of this romantic number. Anti-Semitism, types 1 and 2. Then, of course, there are some basic cultural differences. We are, after all, part of the Middle East. Even though Israel would like to be considered European, or even better, American-like, it isn't. Bordered to the north by Lebanon and Turkey, to the east by Jordan, Syria, Iraq, and last but not least, Iran, to the south and southwest by Saudi Arabia and Egypt, tiny Israel is living in a tough neighborhood. Therefore, it has to be tough as well. Thanks to territorial compromises it made after the Yom Kippur War in 1973, it signed peace treaties with Egypt and Jordan. They are cold peace. The populations of these two countries have never really warmed to the idea. Because of reasons of realpolitik, the ruling powers who need Israel for security reasons have forced this upon their populations, though. Even so, Egyptian ordnance maps still have arrows pointing at Jerusalem. I was informed of this by a British Armored Corps officer whom I once met when on holiday in Norway. When I asked him how many Jews he thought there are in the world, he responded with, about 100 million, I think. When I responded with, only about 14 of those 100, which only about 5 in Israel, he replied with the same question I always ask myself. What's all the fuss about then? Why are the ragheads after them then? Now there are about 15 million, of which almost 7 million live in these 8,000 square miles. I still ask myself what the ragheads want from us, who are living on that little sliver of land, 1/600th of their land mass and about 1/250th of their population density. The fuss is about something which has always existed and which is called anti-Semitism. This is an irrational hatred of Jews which has existed for as long as they have. It probably started when someone or something termed us as the chosen people. I'm not sure what or whom it was, but it brought us a lot of trouble. Over the 4,000 years that we have existed as a people, religion or whatever, we have lost countless millions because of it. Maybe there would be as many Jews as that naive British officer thought if we hadn't been so persecuted over millennia. I, for one, have fought it. Many Jews don't and live in fear. Here are 2 incidents which define what can cause anti-Semitic outbursts, if not worse. The first happened when some ultra-religious idiot on his bike in Antwerp crossed against a red light, which caused an irate Flemish worthy to exit his car with the possibly legitimate intention of at least breaking his neck. I happened to be there and intervened without him realizing I was Jewish too, to stop any damage to our Haredi nitwit, who blithely continued on his way without even having noticed what he had caused. I managed to calm the Flemish worthy down and set him on his way and ran off the oblivious nitwit to give him a piece of my mind. When I caught up with him, this is what ensued. What the hell do you think you're doing when I'm risking life and limb so that you shouldn't get beaten up by some anti-Semite? I yelled at him breathlessly in perfect Yiddish as he had taken a lead of 50 yards on his bike and, oh yes, on the pavement, of course. I knew him and his family, of which he was the most religiously extreme, the rest of them being normal, modern, religious members of the faith. He looked at me blankly, probably mentally absorbed in some complicated people, and asked, "Was suchst du? What are you saying? Was willst du? What do you want?" I screamed, "Don't you even realize what just happened to you, you fool?" He went on looking vague. So I explained. He then said, "Gott sei Dank, hat geholfen. Thank the Lord, he helped." Yes, he sent me to help you, you stupid idiot. When I told his father, whom I happened to run into the next day, what had occurred, he shook his head forlornly and said, "He's living in another world. He doesn't know what the modern world is. He just sits and learns all day." I provoked the second incident. One Sunday, I went to fetch Anish, my friend, to take him and his wife and baby son to the park. I was not wearing any headgear or wearing black, so was not recognizably Jewish. The rubbish collections in Antwerp took place 3 times a week. You put your rubbish bins with their plastic bags in front of your front door. If you lived in an apartment block, this could partially block the pavement, so people would make an effort to spread the bins, sometimes placing them sideways at one's own front door and a little nearer to the neighbor's front door. A little goodwill on both sides saw to it that no inconvenience would occur. I had parked a little further up the street, and when Susanna, carrying the baby, came down, I directed her to the car and told her to make herself comfortable. Anish was still busy on a call and would be down soon, she told me. At that moment, a car drew up to the door of the inside parking of the next door building. A small, elderly-looking man got out and looked pointedly at the bin Anish had brought down a little earlier for the next morning's pickup. I walked over and addressed him in Flemish. "Is everything all right, sir? You look a little angry." He replied, "Those bloody foreigners, they're always blocking my doorway with their rubbish. Next time, I'm calling the police." The overlap was only a couple of inches and nothing was impeding his entrance either on foot or by car into his building. My blood was boiling and I answered, "So you're going to call the police, are you? Just like your lot did 70 years ago." He knew immediately what I was alluding to the wartime collaboration of the Flemish nationalists with the Nazis when they denounced their Jewish neighbors, thereby condemning them to a horrible death. He went red and screamed, "You dirty Jew! I wish those times were back again so that they could get rid of the rest of the likes of you too." He made a break for his car. He was older than me, but very fast. He locked his car from the inside, but his garage door was still down. I pounded on the roof of his car, screaming, "You black-shirted bastard! If I ever come across you when you're not cowering in your car in fear of Jews, I'll fucking well kill you. Times are changing. Now we'll put the fear into you, you murdering swine." He finally disappeared, but there were quite a lot of people watching. The Jews, for it was near the park in the Jewish area, with approval on their faces. As to the Gentiles, some were nodding approvingly, for as it happened, the man had done jail time after the end of the war and had been known as a collaborator. Others, though, were looking at me disapprovingly, as if I had breached their precious Sunday afternoon peaceful ritual. I, of course, being a pushy little Jew. I was shaking with anger, and the second lot decided that discretion was the better part of valor. In the first incident, provoked by the Haredi half-wit, the aggrieved driver would have attacked a priest for the foolhardiness that the half-wit demonstrated. He may not have been an anti-Semite before. Afterwards, maybe. His violence was forgivable, as he had almost been provoked into causing an accident. In the second incident that I provoked, the anti-Semitism was blatant. I just revealed it. This miscreant hated everybody, not only Jews, and he isn't Jewish, but anything that wasn't recognizable to him as Flemish and probably Catholic was anathema. These are the right-wing extremists, endemic to all cultures to some extent, to be found everywhere you can go in the world today. Somewhat similar to the Japanese gentleman who challenged me to a drinking bout. He would have got on well with the black shirt. I often write blogs, starting with the expression, "To all my anti-Semitic friends." Of course, I get asked, how can you have friends who are anti-Semites? This is a cultural thing, endemic to European and to some extent American tradition, as in the infamous, "they sucked it up with their mother's milk." It is a mainly Catholic-derived phenomenon. I have friends who don't even realize that they're anti-Semites and who deny it, saying, "Some of my best friends are Jewish, just like you." In itself, by saying that I'm special, not like the others, they are unwittingly admitting to anti-Semitic tropes. I talk to them and show them why they are anti-Semites. They then immediately go and make new Jewish friends, hereby being able to say instead, "Quite a few of my friends are Jewish." But here again, as usual, I digress. Pet peeve in Israel. Now we come to my pet peeve. I can't decide if the Israelis are the worst or the best drivers in the world. They hardly ever indicate, love to tailgate to such an extent that it's almost sadistic. On the other hand, they'll hog the inside lane at low speed just to show you who's king of the road. Here are just a few case studies of what can happen to you on the local roads. I even know people who have stopped driving here because they have been so traumatized by what has happened to them, even if it didn't result in an accident. I suffer from severe road rage, and one day might find myself behind bars because I've finally taken down a miscreant bully whose ego is as large as his member is small, for which reason he drives an outside SUV. Give your imagination free rein and imagine what you would do in these cases, and then see what I did. You're driving on the street in the center of town. In front of you, a big SUV crosses a zebra crossing at speed. A little old man is still on it when the vehicle almost knocks him over whilst hooting loudly. I followed the barbarian, and when we both stopped next to each other at the next red light, I hooted and signaled him to open his window. I was on his right, so when the passenger window rolled down, I could see that the passenger was evidently the maybe twin brother of the driver. They were typical Israeli great unwashed, big and overweight because of their fondness for falafel and hummus, irrigated with plentiful doses of beer, and followed by a 2-pack-a-day habit of cigarettes, somewhat how I looked like, except I'm small, before Dr. Schilder's intervention, which saved my life. I asked in good Hebrew, maybe slightly tinted with a French accent, "What were you guys thinking at the last zebra crossing? Didn't you see that you almost knocked the little old man over? You gave him the fright of his life." The response I got from my neighbor in the passenger seat was, "Ma akhpat lanu mimenu ya ben zona." Or, "What do we care about him, you son of a prostitute?" However, there was one flaw to this pearl. It was growled with a pronounced lisp, to which yours truly responded with an equally pronounced lisp. "אני לא בן זונה, אבל אני אסלח אותך לאן בני זונה הולכים אם אתה מדבר בסגנון הזה." Translated with TH replacing S in the appropriate places, "I am not the son of a prostitute, but I'll send you where sons of prostitutes go if you keep on talking that style." He went berserk, but his brother noticed my psychopathic smile, which can be very frightening when it's flashed at full blast, and grabbed hold of his arm, not letting him exit the SUV, which would have resulted in a broken shin bone for him, if not worse. Sometimes discretion is the better part of valor, but don't tell me that. They drove off with a loud squealing of tires as soon as the lights changed, and I don't think I ever saw them again. Let's continue. In the same area, in a narrow street, I was in the middle of a parking maneuver, already diagonal to the curb, when yet again a big SUV with tinted windows drove up behind me, and the driver started hooting wildly. He didn't have time for me to complete my maneuver. He didn't want my parking spot, but wanted me to drive off so he could continue on his merry way. When he went on hooting, I got out of my car, still in its diagonal position. It would be an exaggeration to say that I unwound from the driver's seat. I'm getting even smaller in my old age, but I moved very deliberately, and approaching his car indicated that he should roll his window down. When he did, I said without the customary shalom to the zlob, the equivalent to the foreign yob in good Hebrew, "I don't know what's going to happen now, but if you don't stop hooting and let me finish parking, one of us is going to end up in hospital. And I can't guarantee it's going to be me." What could have been the triplet to the aforementioned maybe twins from the previous paragraph just said, "Slicha, sorry, let me finish parking," and we parted ways in a peaceable manner. Another incident that happened on the coastal road, Road 2, late one night when a sports coupe speeding along in front of me was weaving in and out between cars without indicating, a custom I absolutely abhor, and which caused me to follow him until we reached the South Netanya exit. At the light, I opened my passenger window and yelled at him, "There's something wrong with your car, it doesn't indicate." He gave a slow smile and answered, "Are you normal? Where did you learn to drive? Care to make an issue of it?" To this I answered, "In Europe, we can't make an issue of it, the light's green." I drove off. The reason I hadn't made an issue of it was because this guy was more than 30 years younger than me, looked very fit, in fact, may have been a graduate of a top army reconnaissance unit, and our fight would have had serious serious consequences. He had what I have too. It's called zanshin in Japanese, and means a state of awareness, which in effect shows that you are ready for anything. This is the reason that since I was a teenager, I've never had to fight, even though I was in dangerous situations quite a few times. I projected threat and readiness. When this is done in the presence of normative people, it is sufficient to make them think twice before starting something they might regret. In the case when one comes up against someone in a psychologically unbalanced state, one can end up in a serious, even life-threatening situation. It is not uncommon in places with lax gun laws or where guns are common, the first place being the United States and the second being Israel, even though it is very difficult for civilians to acquire guns here, for fights about driving and parking to end up with someone getting shot or even killed. The hot climate is also an element. Hot-blooded reactions are more prevalent in hot climates. By the way, the 3 incidents described above all happened in our first year here. Since then, I've been involved in a few accidents, thankfully only with material damage, and the most recent being only a week ago. I won't go into whose fault it was, but it wasn't mine. The guy who crashed into my car, causing extensive damage last Friday, tried to railroad me into admitting responsibility, but I said to him, "I don't think so. See you in court." We know each other off the road too. He's an irascible old goat, but I'm not sure if he's ever heard the word forensics, a word which my eventual lawyer will use extensively in my defense. I once asked a very nice-looking middle-aged lady in the car next to me why I hadn't seen her indicating. She gave me an enigmatic smile and just shrugged. She then drove off, and again, I didn't see her indicate when changing lanes, or even when she did a U-turn a couple of lights further on. I think I may have found the reason for all this non-indication. It's possible that in the army, all these drivers were impregnated, if you'll pardon the term, with field and cybersecurity intelligence presets. Some of them may even be members of the famous Mossad, equivalent to the CIA, the British MI6, and British MI6. They are so well trained not to show what their next move may be that they don't even indicate. That this may endanger their fellow road users and themselves is of no consequence, as the famous saying, Tov lamut ba'ad artzenu, or it is good to die for our country, purportedly the dying words of our famous hero Yosef Trumpeldor when fatally shot at Tel Chai proved. The problem with the Israelis is not that they're bad people, not at all. They're just very impatient as a rule and don't have time for what passes as manners in other places, believing them to be signs of hypocrisy. They use the word achi, my brother, a lot here, and often just before a fight. They mean it too. They love their brother until at the end of their tether, whilst defending themselves against a sudden attack, they will call him Ben Zonah, the meaning of which I have just explained. In the Middle East, tribalism is common, especially amongst the Arabs. Each village is an entity on its own. That is why there are so many civil wars here. Even though religion is very important in the Muslim world, it is an even stronger binding factor in the Jewish ones. One, the many ethnic strains all have their own liturgy, as do other religions, but the strongest credo binding them all and thus preventing the lethal outbursts as between Shia and Sunni Muslims who hate each other more than their common enemy, the Jew, is the Shema Yisrael prayer, the Hero Israel prayer, the last sentence that most Jews will utter before going to meet their Maker. The average Israeli doesn't feel the pleasantness of the social niceties practiced in Europe and all other continents. You only have to listen to the way he answers the phone. It's not at all like the soft, almost hypnotizing sound of a Japanese mosh mosh, or the velvety sound of a French bonjour, and the musical sounding Italian buongiorno. No, it's a shouted growl, allo, which often will make the caller do a double take and ask himself, what have I done to upset Chaim, who is actually in a very good mood, just a little impatient because Moshe called him 3 minutes later than they had agreed upon. Being a local extra. To fill up my time as a retiree, I needed some more to do than just karate. Having always wanted to act and not caring much about the money, I decided to try to become an extra in film and TV productions. It is probably the worst paying job in the whole economic scene over here, even though film and TV are flourishing, much less than the minimum wage. There were never young people around in any of the productions I appeared in because the pay was just too bad. It worked out at 160 shekels a day, and it was from home in the morning to home at night, much more than 8 hours a day. You only were called about once a month, and this was supposed to add to the lousy pensions the local make anyway, which is barely livable unless you're an ex-bureaucrat, employee of the electric corporation, port authority, or army and above the rank of lieutenant colonel. I was going to do it for love of it, though. Thank the good Lord, money definitely wasn't the issue. There was a big difference in how local and foreign productions were filmed. The foreign ones took endless takes to finish. I was in The Dig with Jason Isaacs and the Israeli actor Ori Pfeffer. It was, I think, a joint Anglo-American production. A large building's lower floors in Herzliya were used as a stage for part of the US Embassy in Tel Aviv. I and around 20 other extras were bused there from Tel Aviv, even though it was much further from our homes if we had been allowed to make our way there on our own, but that's Israeli efficiency for you. We were given strict instructions not to interact with the actors by the dimwit in charge of us. My job was to sit with my back to the cameras, if you please, and act as if I was ostentatiously reading a copy of the Jerusalem Post. Why ostentatiously, might you well wonder? I had to hold a rag, probably one of the worst edited in the English language, except maybe for this one on its conclusion, but I'm not a supposed professional, up high so that the camera could catch the title. I kid you not. But the American nerd directing Jason and Ori in a scene where they were meeting in the lobby of the embassy did about 50 takes on the 20-second scene. All the other extras was not on the set at that moment, but I was the one being made to work for his paltry reward. During a break, and almost a breaking point because of the free and high-up publicity I was giving the rag, I remarked to Jason on his passing by me for yet another contract fab with the director and Ori, is the gun you're carrying in your holster real? If so, could you please do an act of mercy and shoot me with it and put me out of my misery? He did a double take because the extras all being natives, he hadn't expected to be addressed in English and burst out laughing. Sorry, no bullets in it. He looked at me with a big grin and said, "You're doing a great job. Just keep it up." With this innuendo, I had to be satisfied. Moreover, the beadle of the extras came rushing over and yelled, "אמרתי לך לא לדבר עם השחקנים. אתה רוצה שאני אעוף אותך מפה בלי כסף? I told you not to talk to the actors. Do you want me to chuck you out of here without any pay?" To this I responded with a weak shake of my head, answering, "אני יהודי זקן, רק שאלתי את האדון כמה זמן זה עוד ייקח, כי מאוד חם פה, אני צריך קצת מים." Or, "I'm an old Jew. I only asked the gentleman how long more this would take as it's very hot. I need a little water." It wasn't. The air conditioning was on at full blast and the strobe lights were far away from the back of my head, just highlighting the Jerusalem Post title above my outstretched, aching arms. I added to myself as he hurried off to get me some tap water, as stipulated in our contract, the bottled kind being beyond the company hiring the extras budget. "Go get laid, homeboy. You probably need a break from this madness too." Israeli productions went very fast. I remember being on the well-known Savrim Ranan, where the episode concerned a family wedding presided over by a female reform rabbi from the United States. The scene I was in, and in which all the main actors appeared too, took place in the garden. The reform Rebbetzin was kissing all the famous figures, not any of the extras though, on the cheek, and this for only one single take. At the end of the take, once more against instructions, but I couldn't see the beadle anywhere close, I walked up to the director and suggested, "Why don't you have the rabbi French kiss one of the better-looking members of the male cast to add a bit more comedy to the proceedings?" The response to this gem was a loud guffaw, to which the nerd, of course, came running. The director didn't even let him say a word, but chortled, "מה הוא עושה אצלכם? תלווה לי אותו, הוא מצחיק. What's he doing with you? Lend him to me, he's funny." They couldn't film a scene like this, of course. It would have outraged both the Orthodox and Reform religious hierarchies. The first for depicting a rabbi Frenching anybody, even if she's a she, and the second for simply taking the mickey out of this modern type of Judaism. The last straw for me, anyway, was a short film by Yonatan Indorsky, The Cantor and the Sea. He is a very well-known director, famous for, amongst other creations, Shtisel. We were brought to a synagogue in Tel Aviv where we were supposed to act as a congregation at the Yom Kippur Kol Nidre prayer, one of the most important in the Jewish liturgy. I was the only person wearing a suit, and I brought my own talit, prayer shawl, along. So I was appointed to be Rosh HaKehillah, synagogue president. I sat right in front of the actor Yoav Haidt, who played the Chazan. After the prayers, we were all, men and women alike, supposed to leave the synagogue and were filmed at the exit. This is where I addressed the beadle, nerd, or whatever you wish to term this halfwit. On this, the most solemn day of the Jewish year, you'll never see an arms plate right at the entrance of the synagogue with banknotes on it. He balked at my suggestion and said, "Asur lingor badvarim po. One must not touch things here." Just move the plate out of camera range. You won't see a plate full of money in a place like this on this, the holiest day in the Hebrew calendar. He again refused to listen to me, and when I asked to talk to the director, he sent me home. When he refused to pay me, I put on my psychopathic smile. It worked. He was nowhere near the physical amplitude of the triplets I had encountered on the roads of Netanya. I went home with 160 shekels, but haven't been in the extra since then. Watching the 25-minute film this afternoon, I noticed that the scene with the plate had been cut. Maybe Yonatan Indorsky got wind of my protests, even though I was forced to ride off into the sunset. Sextons. I haven't talked much about sextons yet. They are a very important part of the Jewish religious scene, as opposed to beadles, whom I have mentioned in some detail when generally referring to some kind of flunky or general dog's body. They are much higher up in the shul hierarchy. In the United Synagogue in England, they are very formal and often sport top hats as a sign of their standing in the community. However, almost without exception, wherever they are to be found, be it in Antwerp, London, Jerusalem, or even here in Ir Yamin, the modern part of Ramat Poleg in Britannia, they all have very inflated egos. My pal Meilech Wilk never let me lead the prayers in Antwerp because I rarely, if ever, wore headgear on the street. This is a custom that religious Ashkenazi Jews practice, but Sephardi ones in general don't. It is not one of the 613 commandments in the Torah. Maybe because of the cold winters in Eastern Europe, very religious Jews who still dress in the 17th century garb their persecutors wore, adopted the shtreimel and other gear that the Cossacks, who murdered tens of thousands under Bogdan Khmelnytsky, wore. I think this is for two reasons. The first was to blend in with the rest of the population, and the second was possibly to camouflage themselves into their surroundings without having to assimilate, a little like Sephardi conversos did in Spain and Portugal a few hundred years earlier. The ultra-Orthodox kept this fashion till today. They believe that Moses dressed like this, although medieval painters never depicted him in anything like what they wear, and he was bareheaded in their paintings, very much like Jesus, but I digress. So Meilech barred me from the cantor's platform, even though we like each other a lot. I didn't have a pet name for him as I do for our recently resigned ex-sexton here. I must add that the job is a very important one. Fundraising is an integral part of the job, as is keeping all community members happy. Invariably, they are good at the first and really bad at the second. Our just resigned Yaki Frenkel, whom I nicknamed Kim Jong-un, and who took this as a compliment, is actually quite a nice fellow, if you could take Stick, a prominent talent of mine, but far from everyone in society in general. One can sometimes see a slighted community member walk out in the middle of the service in a huff because the sexton will have rightly or even wrongly called him to order. I remember Dad. He used to love synagogue intrigues when he was younger. He was never vicious in his support of one member against another, but used to love instigating what he termed a bit of fun. Whenever M.K. Noller and Tzvi Winkstein have some disagreement with the Brochwein clan over either synagogue or national politics. It's when he got older and that his position became threatened because of this that he found out how serious bits of fun could be to his cost. Community and banter. The Mossad, a very important part of the Israeli government apparatus, also has an important ex-member embedded in our community. For security reasons, his name here will be Lenny Diamant. He is a pillar of the community and often officiates at prayers and reads from the Torah portions too. I once made a suggestion to him. As I have great difficulty in keeping secrets, I put the idea to him of making me not a double but a triple agent. I would be trained as a field agent, fed all the wrong information unwittingly, and then sent abroad only to be betrayed by an enemy yet again, but in this case only double agent, and smuggled in a trunk to an Arab capital. Eventually, I would crack under torture and give the wrong information I had been fed to the enemy, which would be of absolutely no use to them, but only totally disorganize any battle plans they had in a future conflict. Again, the Tov Lamut Ba'ad Artzeinu syndrome, but this time on foreign soil. Lenny had a good laugh at this, saying, "This has been done before by foreign intelligence services, but not executed by the person who suggested such a wacky scenario. Just stick to karate." He has since retired, but still sometimes bursts out laughing whenever he looks sideways at me, an art he has acquired to perfection. As it happens, his wife, Marguerite, is my ophthalmologist, and it is thanks to her that I have been able to read the small print in this masterpiece with the prescription glasses she had me purchase. The Anglos are probably the most active as far as cultural activities in the community hall goes. There are always activities going on in the synagogue. Almost every Shabbat before the corona outbreak, there was a kiddush libation with pot roast and other delicacies. Very often there are bar mitzvot, some candidates who might teach, pre-wedding festivities, and other events such as Yom Ha'atzmaut, Independence Day, and Lag BaOmer, a joyful day after a month of sorrow. Even though from different ethnicities, the different groups are melting into the pot called being Israeli. The community has another special characteristic. It is mixed as being partly Ashkenazi and partly Sephardi. It is one of the few really mixed communities in Israel. I call it an Ashkenazi community as opposed to a Sfaradi for obvious reasons. Rabbi Ido's wife, whom I give the rabbinical title of Reb Daphna to, is of Sfaradi and he of Ashkenazi extraction, and their 4 beautiful children are living proof of the success of our own little melting pot. There are other activities in the hall. The rabbi often gives Bible courses. Dr. Bernard Olsberg, another good friend, presides over the debating society, and there are often quiz and sing-along activities. In short, if you allow me to be, we are a very vibrant community, maybe as Rabbi Dr. Yona Unmensch sometimes describes it, a bit of a social club. Johnny, my carer, and the only 34-year-old Ellie Tilson, also a newly ordained rabbi and new president of Kihilat Shari Tfilah, or the Gates of Prayer community, are a 3-generational group of what could be termed the 3 Musketeers. In normal times on Shabbat afternoons, we sit with each other at the Sudah Shlishit, 3rd meal table, and exchange pleasantries. They love to take the mickey out of me, but as in the weakest link, I just laugh along with them. The only time I take umbrage at banter is if someone I don't know joins a group of friends, hears them making fun of me, and automatically joins in. Then I raise my hand and say very clearly, we don't know each other. When we do, join in. For the meantime, just listen and learn. An example of this was once what happened in the dojo of Dirk Shehan in Hasselt. A foreign guest had walked into the dojo, and before the lesson, while the regular banter was going on, this fellow, a senior black belt in his country, also joined in. I didn't mind this from my friends, but I did from him. Suddenly, again, in one of my mad moments, I said to him, without his knowing that I am Jewish, tell me, are there any Jews in your country? Of which there had been many before the Holocaust. He answered angrily, yes, there's one in my street and he owns the whole of it. He was bigger and heavier than me, but I didn't care. Once the session started, I intentionally paired up with him and gave him one hell of a walloping during the whole session. I could see Dirk smiling slightly, as I'm not too sure that he was too fond of the guy either. After we had showered, the fellow asked me, why didn't you exercise some control? At a certain point, you hit me so hard that I almost vomited. My answer was, I'm Jewish, you know, and I don't own any streets anywhere. He didn't say a word more, and I didn't shake his hand when he left, never again to be seen by me. Banter can only come from friends. Otherwise, there can be serious consequences. Main reason, new car. This is the last bit. I have made friends with quite a lot of the younger members, some of whom say that I am blessed with the Peter Pan syndrome. There are too many names to mention, of course. Johnny, Ellie, and Reb Ida are right up there at the top, together with their families. Bernard, Juster, Yves Chagai, Alan Singer, Avner Alush, Tiel Ochayon, Eitan Elias, and all their families as well. There are a couple of people who aren't such big fans, but that is inevitable, and it doesn't worry me much. I love jamming with Bernard and have recently discovered that Eitan is, apart from being a very good masseur, a good pianist too. After this damn virus will have passed, we're planning a concert which will break box office records in Israel. So I've reached the grand middle age of 74. By today's standards, Gila and I are not that old. It's a bit of a pity that because of her work, there were some things we couldn't do together. Actually, though she's very skeptical about it, I think I could have turned her into a proficient martial artist. She's a natural. I watch reruns of Seinfeld every day. My schedule runs according to its showings. Most of the time, I identify with George Costanza, except when I meet bigger schlemiers than me. I also identify somewhat with the legendary Cosmo Kramer and sometimes even with Jerry himself, but that's usually when I meet a much older dodderer than myself. On very rare occasions, I can even metamorphose into a male Elaine Bennis, especially when I have to put some nitwit in his place. As to you, dear readers, I have only one small request to you. This work, maybe with a question mark, might touch you, make you weep, smile, or even laugh. It came into being on a spur-of-the-moment decision by yours truly to pen what he thinks is an interesting family and personal history. The history, in a kind of Tacitus sense, or maybe a Seinfeldian sense, of a typical Jewish adolescent. It was brought into existence due to a catastrophic cycle of events which only happen about once every 100 years or so. I just woke up one morning during the curfew, said to myself, what was it all for? And started writing. And dear reader, although you should never start a sentence with that preposition, my request is, if you've had the patience to read this book from cover to cover and not really liked it as much as I should like you to, don't discard or forget it. Make another potential victim unhappy too, not by, God forbid, lending it to him, but by recommending that he or she should buy it. I need a new car. That's it, ladies and gentlemen, my path. In about a month or two, it'll be ready for distribution, sale, whatever. I hope that the 3 readings that I've given, about a quarter of the book, there are still very many other anecdotes which I haven't touched upon in these readings, will be successful. And with that, I wish you all a hearty Shavua Tov and good night. See you tomorrow.